They changed the locks while I was at work, dragged my camper to the curb, forged a lease with my name, and told me to go back to where I came from. That's when I picked up the phone, dialed 911, and took back everything they thought they could steal. Hi, I'm Lauren, and for most of my life, I was the quiet daughter no one listened to. But when my family tried to take the one thing I built with my own hands, I didn't stay silent. What happened next turned my small town upside down and made even my most distant relatives pick a side. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now let's start the story together. I was the firstborn, but you'd never know it by looking at our family photo wall. Every frame in our living room was a tribute to Ryan. His kindergarten macaroni art, his first Little League medal, his wide smile with missing front teeth. My pictures were there too, tucked in the corners, usually in group shots, half shadowed or cropped by someone else's elbow. Mom always said it was just easier to focus on one child at a time, but somehow, one always meant Ryan. I still remember my 10th birthday, standing in the backyard in my Sunday dress while Ryan unwrapped a brand new mountain bike. Blue with silver stripes, streamers curling from the handlebars. Everyone clapped as he did circles around the patio. When it was my turn, Mom handed me a white plastic bag from the dollar store. Inside were 2 pairs of gray socks and a pack of gum. "Girls don't need bikes," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I smiled back and said, "Thank you," and that was the day I stopped expecting more. Most of my childhood memories came with a faint taste of embarrassment, like the time I brought home a perfect math score and Dad barely looked up from his paper. But when Ryan passed a spelling test, barely, he got ice cream and a pat on the back. On school nights, Mom would check his homework while I did mine quietly at the kitchen table. I got used to hearing, "Hold on, sweetie, I'm with Ryan right now." By middle school, I learned how to disappear in a room full of people. Thanksgiving dinners were always a blur of relatives asking about Ryan's baseball games, Ryan's science fair trophies, Ryan's big plans. "And you, Lauren?" they'd ask, finally turning to me as dessert was being cleared. "Still drawing, huh?" I stopped bringing my sketchbook to the table after that. In high school, I took on part-time work at a local bookstore and used my savings to apply to colleges. When I got into a private university in Pittsburgh with a partial scholarship, Mom said, "That's great. Just don't expect us to drive up every weekend." I didn't. Ryan didn't even apply to college. He stayed home, took a job at a local warehouse, and dated girls who reminded Mom of her younger self. "He's finding his way," she'd say proudly, like it was a virtue. I graduated summa cum laude in a quiet ceremony on a rainy Saturday. I had told them the date, the time, even offered to pay for gas. No one came. I waited outside the auditorium in my cap and gown, clutching my diploma in one hand and my phone in the other, until the drizzle turned into real rain and washed away the last bit of hope. I moved to Pittsburgh that summer, renting a small apartment above a bakery that always smelled like cinnamon and yeast. It was the first place I could decorate however I wanted. I hung my own photos on the wall, pictures of city parks, bookstores, thrift stores, and long walks by the river. Not a single one had Ryan in it. One evening, while unpacking a box I'd nearly forgotten, I came across a bent photo from my 10th birthday. There was Ryan, his face lit with joy as he straddled his new bike. And off to the side, nearly cropped out, I stood with my hands folded, holding the bag of socks. My smile was small, uncertain, like I was afraid of taking up too much space. I stared at that photo for a long time, then walked out to the tiny balcony. I lit the corner of the picture with a match and dropped it into a metal tin. It curled quickly, edges blackening, Ryan's grin disappearing in a wisp of gray smoke. That night I sat with a cup of tea, watching the city lights blink through my window. I wasn't bitter, not exactly. I had built a life, quiet, simple, my own, and that was enough. At least I thought it was. I thought I had finally escaped them. But they weren't finished with me yet. It took one 5-sentence email to unravel everything I had spent years building. No phone call, no meeting, just a cold message sent on a Friday afternoon. Due to the pandemic and restructuring needs, we regret to inform you. I reread it 4 times before I let it sink in. I had worked at that furniture company for 6 years. I stayed late, covered shifts, trained new hires without being asked. The showroom felt more like home than my apartment ever did. And just like that, it was gone. At first, I tried to be practical. I updated my resume, applied to positions online, reached out to old coworkers. I told myself it was temporary. I had a little savings, a few freelance gigs, and a small emergency fund. But the city was shutting down. Restaurants closed, offices emptied, job postings dried up overnight. Rent was due. So were bills. Groceries became tighter. Within a month, I had to let go of my apartment. I packed everything into the back of my 2005 Ford Ranger. What furniture I couldn't sell, I left on the curb. I found an old camper shell online for cheap and bolted it to the truck bed. That would be my new roof. At first, I told myself it was temporary. A week, maybe 2. I parked in a corner of a Walmart lot away from the lights. I used the gym to shower before they reduced their hours. After that, I found gas stations that didn't ask questions. I charged my phone at a local diner where the waitress gave free refills if you ordered plain toast. I learned the rhythm of being invisible. Arrive late, leave early. Don't draw attention. Keep the windows cracked just enough. Stay quiet. I taped a photo to the dashboard, an old magazine clipping of a small white cottage with a front porch and blue shutters. It wasn't real, but it gave me something to look at besides the ceiling of the camper when I lay awake at night, something to hope for. The days blurred. I filled out applications, one after another, sitting in coffee shops with cheap Wi-Fi. I put on makeup in the rearview mirror. I wore clean shirts until I ran out, then hand-washed them in public sinks. I spoke with cheerful voices to hiring managers who never called back. I told no one, until one day I broke. I hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours. The heater in the truck had finally given out. My fingertips were stiff, and my feet ached from being curled up under layers of clothes. I stared at my phone, the battery at 12%, and hit call under the name that still said Mom. She picked up on the 3rd ring. Hello? I swallowed. Mom, it's me. A pause. Lauren? Yeah, listen, things haven't been great. I lost my job back in March, and now... I hesitated. I've been staying in my truck. I was wondering if maybe, just for a bit, until I find something, I could stay at the house. She laughed. Not cruelly, maybe, but sharp, like she thought I was exaggerating. This house is already full, Lauren, she said, her voice brisk. We've got Madison and the kids, and your father's office is now Ryan's workroom. It's not like we have extra space lying around. I didn't know what to say. In the background, I heard Madison's voice, unmistakable in that sugary tone she used when she was being smug. She better get used to it, Madison said, laughing. It's called being an adult. Mom didn't object. She didn't even lower her voice. Anyway, you've always been independent, she added. You'll figure it out. She hung up. I stared at my phone until the screen went black. Ryan never called back. He never even texted. That night, I parked on the edge of a residential street where no one would notice. The wind rattled the camper walls. I wore every layer I had curled into a ball inside a sleeping bag. My breath came out in white puffs, fogging the tiny window. I thought about turning back, begging, enduring the humiliation, sleeping on their couch if it meant being warm. But then I remembered Madison's voice, dripping with sarcasm. I remembered Mom's silence, and I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I'd rather freeze than beg again. I whispered it into the cold. Weeks passed, then months. I got used to the cold, the ache in my lower back from the cramped space. I knew which neighborhoods didn't ask questions and which ones called the cops. I learned how to look put together in 5 minutes flat. I became a master of vanishing. Sometimes strangers looked at me like I was filth. They moved their purses closer or locked their doors when I passed by. They didn't know. Or maybe they didn't care. And then, one morning, as I was sipping lukewarm coffee in a paper cup, a woman approached me in the parking lot. She wore a red flannel jacket and sensible shoes. Her name was Sandy. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Are you still looking for work?" It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The floorboards creaked under my feet. The wallpaper was peeling in corners, and one of the kitchen cabinet doors hung loose like a tired shoulder. But as I stood in the center of the dusty living room, keys still warm in my palm, it felt like I was holding a life I had rebuilt with both hands. Back when I first met Sandy in that parking lot, I had no idea what kind of place she worked for. Maple and Pine Interiors was a modest design firm nestled between a shoe repair shop and a bakery in downtown Beaver, Pennsylvania. The windows had hand-painted lettering and a chipped wooden bench out front where Tom, the owner, smoked his pipe every morning without fail. Sandy greeted me with a smile that didn't flinch when she saw the circles under my eyes or the duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "You'll be doing a bit of everything," she said. "If you don't mind hard work, this might be your place." I didn't mind. I was used to working hard. What surprised me was how quiet the place felt. There was no buzzing tension, no voices raised behind closed doors, just the sound of staplers, printers, and Tom calling out for more coffee from his desk at the back. I started on the warehouse floor, lifting boxes of tile samples, organizing displays, sweeping dust that settled faster than I could move it. Some days I worked the front desk. I learned how to smile again, even if it felt stiff at first. Tom didn't say much, but when I cleaned out the storeroom without being asked, he left a can of Coke and a sticky note on my desk. Good job. That meant more than he probably knew. I made rules for myself. No spending unless absolutely necessary. I lived mostly on peanut butter sandwiches and instant oatmeal. I wore the same jeans to work 3 days a week. When the soles of my shoes cracked, I glued them back together with industrial adhesive from the stockroom. Every dollar went into my savings account. Late one September evening, after a long shift, I stopped at a bulletin board outside the local post office. Between flyers for piano lessons and lost pets, a photo caught my eye. A 3-bedroom house, pale yellow with white trim, stood behind an overgrown yard. The paint was flaking, and the porch steps were sagging. But behind the mess, I saw something familiar. A swing set in the backyard, shutters the same shade of blue as the ones in my taped-up cottage photo. The asking price was $92,000. I went to see it that weekend. The realtor apologized for the condition. "It needs love," she said, "but the bones are solid." I barely heard her. I was already picturing curtains in the windows, a chipped coffee table beside the couch, and a calendar on the fridge with birthdays circled in red. It wasn't just a house, it was an answer. I gathered my pay stubs, proof of employment, savings account statements, and a handwritten budget plan. I walked into the bank wearing my cleanest shirt and shoes with freshly glued soles. The loan officer looked me over with polite skepticism. "You live where, currently?" "In my vehicle," I answered. I didn't elaborate. To his credit, he didn't flinch. He flipped through my papers, nodded slowly, and said, "We'll be in touch." The weight nearly broke me. Every time my phone buzzed, my chest tightened. I replayed the meeting in my head, wondering if I'd smiled too little, or if mentioning the camper had cost me everything. Days passed, then a week, then the call came. "Your loan was approved." I barely whispered a thank you. When I hung up, I leaned my head against the break room wall at work and cried for the first time in months, not from fear, from relief. The closing process was slow but steady. I signed document after document, my hand aching by the end. On a bright October afternoon, I picked up the keys and drove straight to my new address. I backed the camper into the yard, unzipped the sleeping bag, and laid it on the hardwood floor in the living room. My first night there, I slept on an air mattress beside the window. The house creaked and sighed like it hadn't had anyone to talk to in years. I left the front porch light on and sat on the steps for a while, sipping tea from a chipped mug I found at a thrift store. It was quiet in the best way. The next morning, I taped the old magazine photo to the fridge. The cottage in the picture still looked a little nicer than mine, but not by much anymore. I walked barefoot through the living room, the cool floor grounding me, and whispered, "I'm home." I hadn't even unpacked when trouble came knocking. They didn't knock like guests. They knocked like they still owned the place. I was scrubbing the kitchen sink when the sharp raps came. 3 firm hits, the kind that rattled the glass in the door. I dried my hands on a dish towel, glanced out the front window, and froze. There they were, all of them. Ryan stood at the front with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, flanked by Madison in oversized sunglasses and an expression of mild disgust. Behind them, my parents looked like they'd stepped out of a staged holiday photo. Dad in his weekend jacket, Mom holding a throw blanket folded in her arms like she was about to redecorate. 3 kids spilled out of the minivan, already shouting and chasing each other across my lawn. It was a crisp October afternoon. The sky was clear. The leaves crackled under their feet like the universe was warning me something was about to snap. I opened the door halfway. "Well, you gonna let us in?" Ryan asked, already nudging past me. I didn't move fast enough to stop him. Madison swept in next, her heels clicking across the hardwood floor I'd refinished with my own hands. She gave a cursory glance at the living room. "Smaller than it looked in the photo," she murmured, dropping her handbag on my reading chair. Carol followed, her eyes scanning the space like she was inspecting a rental. "This seems big for just you," she said with a practiced smile. My father nodded once and headed toward the kitchen, like he knew where the coffee was kept. I stood there, stunned, the door still open. What are you doing here?" Madison dropped her sunglasses onto the coffee table. "We figured it'd be best for the kids to stay here for a while. More room, less noise than Mom and Dad's place." Ryan plopped down on the couch like it belonged to him. "You've got the camper in the back, right? You're used to it. We'll take the rooms inside." I blinked. "You're kidding," I said. He shrugged. "It just makes sense. You're single. You don't need all this space." The kids were already dragging backpacks into the hallway. One of them knocked over a lamp. Madison didn't even look. I stepped in, blocking the hallway. "Number, this isn't happening." Madison arched a brow. "Don't be selfish, Lauren. These are children, family. Your niece had to sleep in a laundry room last week." Carol folded the throw blanket and placed it neatly on the arm of the couch. "Come on, honey. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My voice came out lower than I expected. "You weren't there when I needed a place to sleep. You laughed when I said I was living in my truck." Mom winced, but didn't deny it. "Now that I have something, you think you can just take it?" David looked up from pouring himself a glass of water. "It's not about taking. It's about helping the family. That's what you do." "No," I said, stepping fully into the room. "That's what you expect me to do, whether I can or not." Madison rolled her eyes, crossed her arms. "You're acting ridiculous." "Get out," I said. Silence fell, the kind that makes your skin itch. Madison took one step forward. "You've changed. You think a little house makes you better than everyone else?" I didn't answer. She slapped me. It wasn't hard, but it was sharp, humiliating. My cheek burned as I turned my face, stunned more by the audacity than the pain. No one moved. No one said a word. I straightened, slowly, walked over to the end table and picked up my phone. "What are you doing?" Carol asked, her voice tight. I pressed the screen. "Yes, I'd like to report an assault, and there are people in my home who refuse to leave." Ryan stood up, suddenly panicked. "Lauren, come on, don't make this a thing." I turned to them, phone still pressed to my ear. "You have 5 minutes to leave before the police arrive." I checked the clock. 4 now. Carol looked at my father. He said nothing. Madison looked ready to explode. "You're choosing this over your family," she hissed. "I'm choosing peace. For once." There was movement, a shuffle. Madison muttered something under her breath and gathered the kids, still sulking. Ryan hovered by the door, clearly wanting to say more, but my eyes stopped him. Carol hesitated before finally walking past me, blanket still folded in her arms. The door shut behind them with a heavy thud. I leaned against it, heart pounding. A red light blinked quietly on the security camera by the door. Everything had been recorded. They changed the locks, but I still had the deed and the truth. It happened on a Thursday evening after work. The porch light was on, but the key I'd used every day for over a year no longer fit. I jiggled it, tried again, then stepped back and stared at the doorknob. That's when I noticed the camper. It had been dragged from the backyard and shoved out near the curb like trash. Mud streaked its side panels, and one of the back windows was cracked. My breath caught. I dropped my bag and banged on the door. It swung open slowly. Madison stood there, arms crossed, bare feet on the hardwood floor. I'd refinished myself. "Oh," she said, her voice sweet as syrup. "Didn't expect you back so early." Behind her, Ryan appeared, holding a manila folder thick with papers. "Look," he said before I could speak, "we have a lease agreement. You signed it." I snatched the folder and flipped through it. The signature looked like someone tried to mimic mine from memory. The font was off, the formatting sloppy, not even close. "You think this will hold up?" I asked. Ryan shrugged, avoiding my eyes. "We're already moved in, the kids are settled." "You forged my signature," I said, low and sharp. "You broke into my house and forged my name." I pulled out my phone. Calmly, I dialed the police. When the dispatcher answered, I gave the address. "There are intruders in my home. They've changed the locks and presented falsified documents." Madison's confidence cracked. "You're really doing this?" "I told you to leave," I replied. "This is on you." I stood on the sidewalk, arms folded, while waiting for the police. The air was cold, and I could hear Madison yelling behind the door. Ryan's voice tried to soothe her, but it was useless. 15 minutes later, a cruiser pulled up. 2 officers approached. One of them, Officer Green, asked for ID. I handed over my license and, from my bag, the title deed, mortgage papers, and a USB with security footage showing Ryan and Madison entering the home days earlier, dragging bags behind them, carrying tools to swap the lock. "I also have a video of her slapping me," I added. Inside, Ryan tried to play civil. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said. "We thought she agreed to let us stay. It was verbal at first." Madison leaned heavily into performance. "We have kids," she said, tears building. "We're family. She's twisting this." But the forged lease crumbled quickly. Officer Green compared it to my real signature and shook his head. "This doesn't match." He turned to Ryan. "Unless you'd like to explain under oath how this document came to be, I suggest you pack up and leave. Tonight." Madison exploded into tears. "She's always been jealous of me. She wants to see us homeless." I didn't respond. I stood in the doorway, back straight, and waited while they packed in furious silence. Madison yanked clothes off hangers. Ryan stuffed toys into a plastic tub. One of the kids cried. Another kicked my planter and cracked the ceramic. No apology, no eye contact, just the sound of failure dragging itself out of my house. After the door closed behind them, I reset the lock, walked to the kitchen, and turned on the kettle. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I sat at the dining table with my laptop, pulled up Facebook, and began typing. I didn't embellish. I didn't rage. I wrote the facts. How I lost everything during the pandemic. How I rebuilt it from a truck bed and a handful of odd jobs. How my family turned me away, then came back to take what I had earned. I included the screenshots, the photos, and a side-by-side image of my real signature and the forgery. I attached a short clip from the porch cam showing them entering uninvited. I ended with a simple line. I stayed quiet for years. Not anymore. I hit post. Within the hour, comments flooded in. Old classmates, distant cousins, a few neighbors. People I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages of support. Some wrote just one word. Finally. Others were more direct. I remember Christmas 2007. They gave Ryan a new phone and you got mittens from the dollar bin. That house is yours. Always was. Then a private message popped up. Aunt May. She'd always been quiet at gatherings. I'd caught her watching me once or twice across the dinner table, like she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Her message read, "I'm proud of you, Lauren." We always knew. We just didn't say it. My throat tightened. I stayed up late that night, replying to every message, every comment. I wasn't trying to go viral. I was trying to be heard, for once truly heard. The next morning, I opened my front door to find a small envelope taped to the porch railing. No name. Inside was a folded card with a handwritten note. "You did the right thing. Never let them take your peace." I tucked it inside a kitchen drawer. The house was quiet again, for now, but peace was never permanent in my story. Not yet. The porch light was mine. The silence, finally, was mine too. It was the kind of December morning that asked for a second cup of tea. The frost had settled on the windows overnight, etching delicate lace into the corners of the glass. Inside, the house was warm and still, the scent of cinnamon and pine hanging in the air. My Bluetooth speaker hummed softly with old jazz standards, barely audible beneath the gentle rattle of wind brushing against the shutters. The living room looked different now, not polished, still a little rough around the edges, but lived in. The Christmas tree leaned slightly to the left, strung with mismatched ornaments and topped by a crooked paper star that Emma had made. In green crayon, she'd written, "You are enough." It hung there like a quiet blessing. After everything, I had rented out the 2 spare rooms. Brianna was a nurse working nights. Chris, a construction supervisor, was hardly ever home. We exchanged pleasantries in the kitchen, respected boundaries, shared snow-shoveling duties when it stormed. They weren't friends exactly, but they were steady, and that was enough. Ryan came by on Sundays with the kids. No grand gestures, no assumptions. Just him, carrying a thermos of cocoa and a bag of hand-me-down board games. He didn't talk about the past. He didn't ask to stay. He let Emma and Max run wild in the backyard while he helped me patch up the garden fence. Max once asked me if he could build a fort near the sunflowers. I told him sure, as long as he left space for the bees. Sometimes the kids left their drawings on the fridge. Dinosaurs, rocket ships, stick figures with lopsided grins. They signed them with, "To Aunt Lauren," and hearts made of glitter glue. Those tiny gestures filled corners of the house that used to feel too quiet. As for Carol, she sent holiday texts now. "Merry Christmas," followed by a snowflake emoji. "Thinking of you," with a tree. I replied with a thumbs up, a smiley face, maybe a red heart if I was feeling generous. Our conversations didn't stretch further than that. I didn't need them to. Dad sent nothing. But I imagined he stood behind her as she typed, nodding like that was enough. I still kept the camper in the backyard. It wasn't a scar anymore. It was a reminder, a rusted, dented symbol of everything I had survived. Some nights, when the world felt too loud, I sat in there for a while, just to remember what quiet desperation had taught me. Peace isn't always found in forgiveness. Sometimes it's found in not needing it. One afternoon in early spring, Ryan lingered after the kids had gone inside. He looked tired. Older somehow, like life had worn down the edges he once sharpened against me. "I wanted to give you this," he said, pulling a folded envelope from his coat. I took it without a word. Later, I opened it at the kitchen counter. Inside was a short letter in his messy handwriting. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I see you now. I see all of it. I'm sorry for how long it took." I didn't cry. I didn't even smile. I just placed it in the drawer with the note from Aunt May, next to a birthday card I'd bought for myself and never used. That evening, I stood on the porch, hands wrapped around a steaming mug. The sky was streaked with soft lavender, the trees swaying gently. Laughter echoed from the backyard where Emma and Max were planting sunflower seeds with plastic spades. Chris was fixing a gutter. Brianna waved from her car as she headed to work. The world wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Sometimes peace isn't something you find. It's something you decide to protect. Standing on my porch with a warm mug in hand, watching the kids laugh near the sunflowers, I realized peace doesn't always arrive with fanfare. It often settles in quietly, like morning light through old curtains. For a long time, I thought home meant being wanted by others. Now, I understand it means feeling safe within yourself. Sometimes, the hardest thing is not forgiving others, but choosing to keep your heart soft after being hurt. And maybe, in the end, healing is less about mending what was broken and more about building something new. If this story reminded you of a moment when you had to stand your ground or found your own version of home, I hope you'll share it. Thank you for listening.